Hey everybody, Donald with Scales Upscaled here, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about ball python genetics. Now we'll be talking about the visual, color, and pattern morph genetics that you would see people dealing with in breeding. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of going down into every genetic. I'm not going to be showing you any Punnett squares like you might see in high school biology. We're just going to give a brief overview of the basic way genetics work in breeding ball pythons, and we're going to get to some examples today, and a lot of these are going to be examples that Scales Upscaled is currently or will soon be working with in projects. So to start out, just basic normal morph of a ball python, no fancy genetics or anything like that. This is Luxa. She is actually one of our breeders. We'll get more into depth on her project at a very soon time, but for now she's going to help us out showing a normal ball python morph. Now you can get a very good look here at the browns and the darker colors along most of her skin, as well as the white belly she's got going on. And you can see the brown patterns sort of form what are usually referred to in ball pythons as alien heads. You'll see a lot of them take kind of an almost like bubble shape and kind of show you almost like two dark eyes in the middle, which is why they're called alien heads. And overall you'll see the darker pattern on top, and so this is your baseline normal morph for a ball python. Interestingly enough, Luxa here is actually not a normal. She visually looks like one, but she is heterozygous for two genes that do not show up when they only have one copy in the snake. Now again, not getting too nitty-gritty into it, but if she were to breed to another ball python who is heterozygous or het for those traits, they do have a chance of showing up in their offspring as visual traits. So actually one I'd like to talk about, and one that she has as a het gene, is actually pied, or piebald for the long version. Piebald is certainly one of the more popular morphs in a ball python, and I think it's easy to see why. You'll see a lot of the color broken down into basically little islands within this white background. Now it can vary very much depending on the snake and their specific line of pied as to how much white they have versus how much color. And you can also see that the color is generally lighter in a piebald where it does show. In combination with some other genes, you can get a whole wild different array, but for the purposes of today, we're just going to be sticking to pretty straightforward one or two gene animals. So another recessive trait that actually Luxa here has in her is exanthic. There are multiple lines of exanthic, but the thing they share in common is they tend to reduce the yellows especially, and some of the browns in the snakes that have them. This is an example of a TSK exanthic, and when combined with pied, you can see here, you'll get something that's sometimes called a lightning pied. And it's just simply a snake that has two copies of each of these recessive genes, piebald and exanthic. This is a bit of a harder project to manage if you're talking about multiple recessive genes. Basically, the offspring have to get that copy of that gene from each of the two parents for it to show visually. So, good example again, Luxa here, she only got one copy from the two of her parents, and so she's not showing for either one. So het genes are heterozygous, a little bit harder to work with, but they can certainly be more rewarding. I mean, piebald is a great example, very popular, very gorgeous morph. There are other kinds of genes that show even if you have just one copy, and those are known as incomplete dominant genes. They're sometimes referred to as co-dominant genes, but the actual proper term is incomplete dominant, so we'll be going with that for now. One good example is a Mojave. Now you can see the Mojave has a bit of a difference from your normal, from like Luxa here. They have stronger or more vivid yellows usually, and the alien heads along their sides tend to express in the form of keyholes, which is basically just one hole in the head, if you want to look at it that way, rather than the two eyes. you know, some morphs express a little differently depending on the line or depending on the snake, but they generally have a common view. All Mojave will look similar in some way. Another example of an incomplete dominant gene is lesser. Now, lessers tend to vary a little bit more from snake to snake, but they generally have in common this blushing. You can see along the side of the snake, actually, sort of a gradient from one color to the other. Again, the colors vary pretty wildly, but generally a lesser is going to have a lighter color than a normal. So maybe a little bit more gray rather than brown, that sort of thing. Lesser Mojave, both of them are known for enhancing other genes, other colors and patterns, and one of the interesting things about them is they're both in what is called the blue-eyed leucistic complex. Now there is a set of maybe half dozen or so, give or take, genes that by themselves make the snakes have a different color or pattern morph, but together they produce what's called a blue-eyed leucistic, or a blue-eyed Lucy. Now, these snakes generally are known for being all white with no pattern or very, very little pattern and having very gorgeous blue eyes. Some combos in the blue-eyed leucistic complex will have a little bit more yellow on the snake, or you'll see maybe a little bit more pattern, but in the case of something like a stark white lesser Mojave, which is what we see here, you'll often see just the pure white snake, maybe just a little bit of coloration, almost nothing, just pure white. Again, another, like the piebald, very popular snake, and I think they're just absolutely gorgeous. So that is actually something we'll be working on as well. Lucia here will not be a part of that project, but we'll be going more into depth on that and her own project in an upcoming video. So one other thing I want to touch on today regarding genes, it's a little bit more of a controversial subject. Now, there are genes that can cause health issues or quality of life issues in snakes. I mean, this goes with all animals, but we're talking specifically about ball pythons. The shame is there's some really gorgeous morphs out there. I'm going to use spider and champagne as examples. I'm not going to show them, but they give some really great coloration and pattern morphs. However, both of those, for example, tend to give the snake that possesses them a bit of a head wobble. Now, it can be almost non-existent, it can be very slight, or it can be so severe that the snake has a poor quality of life and can't even eat because it shakes its head so much. It's a neurological symptom of the genetic trait, and just want to touch on it a little bit because we at Scales Upscaled, though we adore those genes, they look amazing, some of them, we have made the decision not to work with them in our breeding program. We will not have any projects that include traits or genes that have known genetic defects that will affect the health or well-being of our animals. And that goes for, again, spider and champagne are great examples that have that head wobble. There are some others, I'm not going to touch upon them all, but that is our stance. We don't begrudge anybody else for working with them, and especially, you know, if you know what you're doing and you're breeding them, and you know, a lot of the animals will turn out with no severe or significant health issues at all, and that's great, but we are choosing not to take that risk. So just as a disclaimer, you know, if you ever see our future projects and think we're missing something or you want to see this, just know that those are the type of projects we're going to be avoiding for that reason. So, but that's pretty much it. I know we kind of went through it quickly, but again, that's a crash course in the genetics of ball pythons. You know, talking about the het genes, the incomplete dominant genes. One thing I should mention as well with the incomplete dominant, outside of like the blue-eyed leucistic complex, for example, if you get two copies of a incomplete dominant gene in one snake, it actually has a super form, which I'm not going to show, but you know, a lot of them are basically exaggerated forms of the basic gene. So there's some, I mean, there are endless combinations of genes, pattern, and color morphs that you could, you know, possibly put together, and which is, of course, one of the biggest reasons why we decided on ball pythons for breeding. So, but yeah, that about covers it. Again, we will be going over our specific projects and showing how the genes that we currently have and will be getting soon are going to work together. As time goes on, we're going to be expanding more projects, and we'll, take you along for that ride with us. So in the meantime, thank you for watching. Everybody have a great day, and see you next time.